All right, we are recording. Thank you, Patrice. Okay, one more time. I'm Mike Toll, Deputy Director at WestCOG. We are having a webinar for our town planners, zoning commissions. We want to make sure that you are aware of some upcoming requirements that are being put forth that includes requirements to include climate change as a consideration in your plans. And at WestCOG, we thought it might be to include this content for someone's got this. Thank you. Would you mind leading Thatcher out of here? Thank you. We have a staff dog. This is really chaotic. Bye, Thatcher. Okay, sorry about all that. It should be calm now. So at WestCOG, we thought we could go and generate this content in such a way that you can have it as copy and paste into your plan, so that when you are having to meet these new requirements, you don't have to go through the whole process of having to pay extra costs for what is ultimately some very similar content that you will all have in your plans. So that's the whole idea for this. So very quickly, I just want to point out that we have a chat. It's basically a typical meeting. So in the chat, you can write questions. You can name, list who you are. That's good for our records, who you work with, your name. We're going to do some live polling. So if you have your phone handy, get that out, because we're going to put out some QR codes. You're going to want to be able to interact with that and give us our live polls. That will help our presenters know exactly what's going on your end. And then last, we'll take questions at the end. So even if you have a question in the moment, just write it down. We'll get to it at the end. And that way we can kind of keep the presentation recording nice and tight. So that's kind of our pre-business. Before we get in, I think we're ready for our next slide. Okay, so I already mentioned the climate provisions implementation, right? So here are the WestCOG staff. You may know some of us already. Francis, our executive director, he may be swooping in soon. Charles Vidic, who may be joining us remotely. There, I see him there. Thanks, Charlie. And then I'm Mike. I helped oversee some of the work being done here. And without further ado, I want to introduce Dewberry, our team who helped generate all this content. They'll be leading the presentation. And without further ado, I guess, yes, Dewberry, please go ahead. It's all yours.
Thank you. Great to be with everybody today. And thanks so much for joining for the webinar. So you know who we are. Our project team members are here from Dewberry and Resilient Land and Water. We're a multidisciplinary team of climate scientists, hydrologists, GIS analysts, and resilience planners. And we worked with WestCOG to develop the new resources that we'll be introducing today. So my name is Liz Foster. I'm a resilience planner, and I'll provide an overview of Public Act 2533 before my colleague Kara Williams presents the new resources. To get us started, we are going to ask you to answer a quick poll. So if you've got your smartphone handy, go ahead and scan that QR code. Alternatively, you can just type in menti.com and put that code on that you see on the screen and on the website, and that'll let you answer the poll. We will remove all of these from the recording, as we were saying at the intro. If you missed that, we are recording, but we'll edit out these polls and your responses. But this is great. It helps us understand here today what you all might want to learn and talk about, and get a read of the room. So looks like we've got one or two folks who are really familiar with the Act. More folks are kind of in that somewhat familiar category, and a few folks are not at all familiar, which is totally okay. That is what we are going to talk about and spend the next hour reviewing. So hopefully everybody leaves today feeling very familiar with PA 2533. It looks like most folks have had a chance to answer, so we'll keep rolling. Public Act 2533 was signed on June 10th, 2025. It's a broad law. It addresses climate resilience and environmental practices across multiple sectors, including insurance, real estate, as well as planning. The reason that we are here today is that 2533 establishes new requirements for content and plans of conservation and development, so your POCDs. So in summary, any POCD that is adopted on or after October 1, 2027 must now include a vulnerability assessment as well as identify resilience strategies. In addition, the POCDs must use the most recent sea level change, hazard, and climate projections data and incorporate geospatial data and maps. The POCDs must also explain how the resilience strategies are consistent with or differ from the community's other major plan documents. So that might be your hazard mitigation plan, or if your community has a standalone resilience plan, your POCD must address how the new resilience strategies that you're identifying are consistent with or not those other documents. WestCOG has developed several new resources to help municipalities efficiently incorporate hazard data and resilience strategies into your POCD. So these will all be available on the WestCOG website, and they are optional. They're meant to enhance and not replace your local planning processes. So today we'll walk through those in more detail, but briefly, the new resources that are available to you include a model climate resilience chapter. You're able to download this and follow along by adding in your municipality's information. Hazard maps are also available to everybody. WestCOG has already done a hazard assessment for the region and created maps for all 18 municipalities. Along with the model resilience chapter and the maps are implementation guidance. This is a document with instructions for how to access the maps and some considerations for completing the model resilience chapter. And then there will also be a public presentation template. This is just a concise public-facing PowerPoint deck. It's appropriate for using at your planning and zoning commission meetings, and it summarizes the PA 2533 updates and the changes that you all may be making to your POCDs to fulfill those new requirements. Ultimately, approval of the POCD is still the decision of the COG, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and the Office of Policy and Management. We've closely studied PA 2533, and we hope the resources that we're introducing today are useful and successful for you. We would welcome your feedback from if you choose to use them at any point. So in addition to complying with the Act, there are a lot of really good reasons to incorporate resilience into the plans of conservation and development. So as we think about the places that we call home and work in, incorporating resilience into the PCOD helps communities with land use, development decisions, natural resources management, and the ultimate goal is that residents, infrastructure, and the environment are withstanding and thriving despite natural hazard events. So by doing so, the resilience strategies ultimately decrease damage to homes, businesses, critical infrastructure, and the environment, reducing both immediate and long-term disaster recovery costs. Over the long term, limiting those repetitive losses and minimizing disruptions in your community, your community maintains more consistent property values and economic activity. Communities that plan for resilience can also often qualify for better insurance ratings, stronger credit profiles, and can have more competitive scoring for state and federal funding opportunities. In addition to those reasons, using the best available hazard and climate data as required by 2533 does create an evidence-based documented foundation for communities' legal and investment decisions. So this supports consistency in your decision-making, and it helps to maintain the community's long-term vision. The bottom line is that a data-backed, thoughtful plan of conservation and development is also a risk and financial management tool for your communities that get implemented through land use and development. We know many communities are also facing the critical challenge about where to allow housing or how to manage homes that are already in high-risk areas. The vulnerability assessments conducted for, or if you have them already incorporated into the plans of conservation and development, can inform your housing growth plans. And I want to emphasize, overall, ensuring that your POCD is current and meets state requirements critically maintains your eligibility for discretionary state funding, which is, of course, important for implementing your resilience priorities. And finally, WestCOG is making compliance with 2533 more straightforward. We hope the resources that we're introducing today can be completed quickly, or at least used as a jumping off point or a compliance track for your municipality's established planning processes. These resources are not a substitute for public engagement or coordination with your planning and zoning commission. So those activities do need to continue as you're incorporating climate resilience into your POCD. One other quick reminder is that we are not covering all of the required content for your plans of conservation and development. We are focused today on the 2533 sections that have new required resilience content. Stepping back, the Act does strive to increase the state's resilience in other ways. So for example, 2533 expands flood disclosure for property reports. It also requires that municipalities submit culvert and bridge geospatial data to COGs. There are a couple new requirements for hazard mitigation plans. The Act also updates the framework for transfer of development rights. It requires that climate projections be used in other types of state planning, and there are a couple other changes. But it is a very broad Act, and we are focused today on the requirements for POCDs. Our second poll on that topic is, does your plan of conservation and development currently incorporate climate resilience? There are some early adopters across the state. Curious to know if anybody here has already started incorporating climate resilience into your community's plan. So you can participate same way. If you've already answered the poll, it should still be pulled up on your phone or your computer, however you were answering it. If not, QR code and the link to respond are on the right-hand side of the screen. Looks like we've got a couple responses coming through already. So at least 3 folks on the call have already incorporated resilience into your POCD. We've got another 2 respondents who are saying somewhat, and a couple other folks who haven't taken that step yet or are unsure. So a really actually kind of an even mix here across everybody who's on the call today. So thanks for participating. It's really interesting to see. Couple more answers rolling in. Looks like a few more folks have incorporated climate resilience. So that's great. All right, let's jump ahead to getting more into the requirements. So these are the main new resilience requirements for resilience in your plans of conservation and development. So municipalities need to use the most recent sea level change, hazard, and climate projections data. Note that includes future looking as well as kind of current and historical data. As we mentioned at the start, POCDs now need to incorporate a vulnerability assessment. That vulnerability assessment for the Act must be multi-hazard, and at minimum, it needs to consider the impacts of increased temperatures, drought, flooding, wildfire, storm damage, sea level rise, and saltwater intrusion. So saltwater intrusion being when saline water moves into freshwater sources and can contaminate that freshwater. So the vulnerability assessment does need to be multi-hazard and should consider those hazards that we just listed. Additionally, the POCD does need to incorporate geospatial data. Specifically, this includes one new mapping requirement, which is that the POCD include a map of the municipality's proposed land uses, considering the vulnerability assessment results, so tying that data into the planning decisions. Of course, the POCDs also now need to have resilience strategies identified, as well as design standards that reduce natural hazard risk. This can, but doesn't have to include also identifying your community's funding priorities or top investment areas or assets where you're focusing your resiliency strategies. And overall, a consistent theme here is that the plan needs to address alignment and any inconsistencies. And that is both with other major planning documents like your hazard mitigation plan or resilience plan, if you have it, but also several identified growth management principles. Some of these will be familiar from long-standing requirements. So they include maintaining public safety and evacuation routes, revitalizing commercial corridors, expanding housing opportunity and choice, supporting transit-oriented development, conserving natural, historical, and farmland resources, and aligning across all levels of government. So in summary, these are the new resilience requirements to keep in mind when updating your plans of conservation and development. Diving in a bit more, these are the data requirements. So municipalities must use the specified Connecticut sea level change data set. So a reminder that this is a projected estimate of how much sea level may increase over a specific time period, in our case by 2050, under a certain set of assumptions. So you must use that specified Connecticut data set. For other types of hazards, the municipality can select the most recent hazard and climate projections that are established by federal and state authorities. So WestCOG has compiled and prepared these data sets for everybody to use. They will be on the WestCOG website for you to access. If you have already done an assessment that meets these requirements, you can use that data for your POCD. You do not need to redo it. That's good planning alignment and can be noted in your plan. So these are some of the elements that remain the same. So note that any plan that you're working on right now needs to consider planning alignment and note any inconsistencies. You'll also see some familiar themes of community well-being and prosperity, a continued emphasis also on transportation and housing. These requirements for POCDs are not changing with the new resilience requirements. The new resilience requirements are additions. So this looks at the new climate resilience requirements in more detail. These apply to all plans of conservation and development that are adopted on or after October 1, 2027. So some of the requirements expand existing ones, and those are listed at the top of the slide in that more red colored font. Some of the requirements are entirely new, and you'll see those new resilience requirements listed kind of green at the bottom of the slide. So you all already are familiar with the need to recommend and map the most desirable use of land. That now needs to consider the results of the climate vulnerability assessment. It needs to consider your resilient strategies and techniques. And again, it needs to call out any inconsistencies or alignment across planning when doing so. Recommending the most desirable population density is a long-standing requirement that now needs to incorporate the vulnerability-informed land use that we mentioned earlier. And then the inconsistencies in management principles. I know I've mentioned planning alignment a couple different times. That is not an entirely new requirement. What is new there is the consideration for how to reduce vehicle mileage. So those are some of the expanded resilience requirements. And then for the new ones, POCDs should now identify the critical infrastructure that is needed for evacuation, as well as for sustaining quality of life during emergency events. The POCDs also, of course, need to identify risk reduction strategies and design standards, and include that geospatial data, which we mentioned. And again, you don't have to, but the Act says that you may also identify priority areas for investment. And again, those can be determined during the POCD planning process, or maybe be drawing from your hazard mitigation plan or your resilience plans or other aligned documents. There are a few other requirements for a few municipalities that are next to Long Island Sound. So your POCDs also need to incorporate the 3 elements that you see listed on the slide. So the POCD needs to align with your municipal coastal program. That's for protecting coastal resources and minimizing the damage from flooding, erosion, and sea level rise. The POCD also needs to, quote, include reasonable consideration for restoration and protection of the ecosystem and habitat of Long Island Sound, end quote. And then the POCD must also put forward strategies that reduce the elements listed at that last bullet point. So reducing hypoxia, pathogens, toxic contamination, and floating debris in the sound. Hypoxia being a low oxygen environment. So those are some geographic specific requirements. In addition to all of that, 2533 also allows some optional planning opportunities. So specifically, the Act updates the transfer of development rights framework to be about resilience. So TDR, transfer development rights, or sometimes called transfer development credits. It's a market-based regulatory tool. It directs growth towards or away from designated areas. Those are typically areas that are at risk or environmentally sensitive or protected areas that the community wants to remain less developed, while lower risk, more desirable locations are developed. So per 2533, municipalities have the option, but don't have to, identify sending and receiving areas where growth should be limited and encouraged. The Act also allows municipalities to establish resiliency improvement districts, or RIDs. So these are a tool, they're a financing mechanism to fund resilience projects. So a resiliency improvement district, it's a special taxing district, and it assigns the cost of infrastructure and projects to the property owners who benefit from those projects, and thereby increases their property values. So the funding comes through tax increment financing. It can come through special assessments, revenue, and other mechanisms. So if your community is interested in creating a resiliency improvement district, your community's POCD or other planning document must identify that. Down the line, you will also need to create a district master plan that is consistent with your POCD. But at a starting point, your plan of conservation and development should establish your community's goal to create a resiliency improvement district if you want to do so, or even if you want to explore doing so. So bottom line, it's now legal and possible for the POCD to mention a resiliency improvement district. So those are the requirements and some of the new resilience options from 2533. There have been some municipalities across the state that have already successfully implemented these resilience requirements. So a few early adopter examples from outside of this region, just for inspiration and comparison, if that's helpful for everybody, one is from Fairfield. So Fairfield has a chapter called A Resilient Community in their POCD, and they've incorporated a resilience framework that divides the town into different resilience typologies for planning purposes. So that's one way to go about resilience in a POCD. Another example comes from Stratford. So this document is a good example of incorporating that geospatial data and maps. So their plan includes flood and heat vulnerability maps that you see pictured on the screen. And they chose to incorporate resilience as one of their main overall themes for development. So those 5 themes are community, opportunity, partnerships, balance, and resiliency. New Haven is another good example. They use climate tools and mapping significantly in their planning process, and you see an example of that on the left-hand side of the screen. You see some of the data that they were looking at during a planning meeting. They also did a slightly different organization of their POCD, and so their resilience-related chapter is called Climate and Ecological Connections. And municipalities do, of course, have the option with how you go about meeting the new resilience requirements for 2533. So you could have a climate resilience chapter, or you can incorporate resilience and meet the 2533 requirements by incorporating that information elsewhere in your plan organization. So New Haven also did a really nice job. They identified about 100 climate-related actions as part of their plan. And then one final example comes from Clinton. It's another good example to look at for using climate tools and mapping heavily in the planning process. They also have resilience concepts embedded in their vision and their goals and their strategies. Notably, it is also either the first or one of the first POCDs to mention a resiliency improvement district. And so if you're considering doing that, or you want an example potentially of how to do that, taking a look at Clinton's plan is an example for including that RID. All right, we went through a lot of requirements and I shared a lot of information pretty quickly. So I just want to pause here and give everybody the opportunity to either drop a note in the chat, or if you would on Mentimeter, and just share any questions that you have about the Act at this point. We will also come back at the end and turn off recording and do an open Q&A session and kind of sharing of any other comments. But for right now, any immediate questions that you have about the new resilience requirements in 2533? going to give everybody just 10, 15 more seconds to type anything in. I know it can be a little hard on a small keyboard with your smartphone. All right, our first response is not right now though, so that's a pretty good sign. All right, well, if you think of any other questions, we are going to wrap up a few minutes early and have open time for Q&A. But for right now, we'll dive into the new resources that are available.
Thanks, Liz. My name is Kara Williams, and I'm going to be taking you through the new resources we have available for you. Just to start, there's a few overarching purposes we wanted to cover of this resource package. The first is to provide a technically sound, standardized regional resource set, ultimately to support resilient land use and stormwater planning. We wanted to make compliance with PA 2533 as easy as possible, and also provide foundational data set references to use as a backbone for any updated guidance. We also wanted to be clear that each WestCOG municipality will have access to this and is encouraged to use these resources throughout their planning process. A little bit more on access. Access is coming soon. All resources will be available on WestCOG's website at the link below. So the first resource we have for you is the POCD model chapter. It's an example of a draft updated POCD chapter for a municipality. Think of it kind of as a template with some ingrained instructions as well. It's a fill in the blank style format for easy customization with hopefully pretty minimal effort for your community. And it's also going to include some figures and tables as example content. And then, as Liz mentioned, we're also providing an implementation guidance document that'll give some more supporting context and information and instructions on how to fill out this model chapter. Just as an overview, we wanted to give you the main sections of the chapter. They include climate hazards, hazard vulnerability, and planning considerations. This is where most figures you'll reference or create will be included. We'll dig in a little bit more to hazard maps and data in a second. Resilience vision, resilience goals, and then lastly, resilience strategies and actions. Lastly, on this, we just wanted to emphasize that the goal was updating this chapter as easy and straightforward as possible. Some of the work we've done includes grouping municipalities by regional characteristics and hazards, looking at the data sets we pulled together and identified. We've also developed a risk profile tailored to each community. There will be places within the POCD chapter to choose an option based on these groupings and customize them as needed. So just wanted to really follow that through, that we're trying to give as much detail and option as possible. So let's talk about data. So there were 17 total hazard data sets used to develop maps for all 18 municipalities. Not only are we sharing the data sets themselves, but also information on each specific data set, including what it is, how to access and download them, as well as any applicable hazards and uses for these. For example, the Climate Change Vulnerability Index, or CCVI, can be used for rainfall-driven and riverine flooding, coastal flooding, and extreme heat, and should be used for flood and heat-related hazards to inform land use, infrastructure, and resilience planning. So we'll give a similar breakdown for each of those data sets, and that's kind of just a jumping off point for you to have a little bit more information about those. And just a quick note that while we're providing these data sets, not all of them were turned into hazard maps, so they are available for you to source from and create your own figures as well. The hazard maps are available and ready to go for each municipality within WestCOG. Like I said, these can be used kind of as a start to visualizing any hazard data and can plug directly into the POCD chapter as well. We have some sample content as inspiration and some guidelines. So yeah, you have some creativity and jumping off points there. So the implementation guidance does go hand in hand with our POCD model chapter. It includes step-by-step guidance on where to find the resources, information you need. Each chapter section that we covered earlier will include any specific PA 2533 requirements that section addresses, any specific considerations to keep in mind, and then also those instructions as well. Again, we wanted to emphasize that this is very customizable and we wanted to make this useful and quick to update. The last resource I'll be covering today is another short training that is going to be developed, targeting planning and zoning committees as the main audience. The goal here is to provide guidance on public presentations about the new requirements and the POCD update. We're really open to your feedback and taking it into account here. So if you have any comments or input on what you think might work best, please let us know at the Q&A in the end. All right. I know I went through those pretty quick, but we have one last poll. When you get a chance, please take a moment and let us know if you have any questions about these resources. And I will turn it back over to Liz. Thanks.
Absolutely. We'll just give everybody a second there. If you have any immediate questions about the new resources that are available, we're happy to answer them right now. We've got at least one very fast typer in the group who has no questions, but is speedy with the keyboard. So we've got a couple other comments coming in. So excited to use the resources. Awesome. Thank you. We hope they're really useful for you. When will they be available? WestCOG is reviewing some drafts we've provided. So as soon as we know that the materials pass muster, we'll be putting them up on that website. We'll put the URL back on the screen in a second, and we can send a follow-up email with it as well. But they
expect in July. We'll have it ready.
There we go. Want to say it again? That was a great answer.
July.
July. All right, which is only about a week away actually at this point. So we'll get them up soon. And then Carrie, you got one question about the data there. Just rolled in. Is fire risk included as one of the 17 hazard maps?
We do have wildfire as a data set available.
Great, and that is one of the hazards that 2533 is going to ask to be included in your vulnerability assessment, even if it's in a more qualitative and not quantitative way in the POCD. So really good questions. Any other thoughts on the new resources? Okay, great. I do want to share that WestCOG is hosting an upcoming event. So if you'd like to learn more about the resiliency and improvement districts that we mentioned earlier, would encourage you to attend the planners lunch. This will be on Tuesday, July 21st at noon. You should also join for the pizza. But the topic will be the resiliency improvement districts as well as hazard mitigation planning. So no need to register in advance, although an RSVP is helpful for planning. So you'll receive an email with an Outlook calendar invitation and a link to join for that, and details about how to join for that day. So bookmark July 21st at noon. Resiliency improvement districts and hazard mitigation planning will be the topics covered in depth at that event. And with that, that wraps the information that we have to share with you all today. This is the contact information for the WestCOG folks, as well as our project team. If you have any questions for us, we really appreciate you all joining today and taking the time to consider how to incorporate resilience into your POCDs and fulfill the new state requirements, and also just continue to keep your communities safe from natural hazard events. So thank you again. WestCOG folks, I think we're going to cut the recording and maybe go to Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Recording stopped. Not yet. Stop recording.